This Beef Market Update podcast is brought to you by Brett Young. You treat them like family, feed them like family. Talk to your retailer about Brett Young's forage and corn options for a happy, healthy herd or visit brettyoung.ca.
It's now time on RealAgriculture.com for another episode of the Beef Market Update, of course, with Ann Wasko, the Gateway Livestock Exchange. Ann, it's great to chat with you.
Good to chat with you.
It was a little wintry again. I was in Saskatoon all week. It was actually it's winter conditions, but it's actually mild. It was nice to be in Saskatoon and not be faced with minus 40, minus 50, and you're scared to walk half a block. It was actually quite nice. I'm not.
Well, that is good to hear.
Not going to complain about it. Yeah. Okay. Let's dive in here. There's a lot to chat about, a lot of numbers, and a lot of them connect to each other. So let's start off like we always do with a bit of a price update. What have we seen in Canada and the U.S.?
Well, yeah, let's start with the U.S. We didn't talk last week, so there was a big jump last week in prices in the U.S. So this week we held those together. So in the South, Texas and Kansas, they're going to call the trade steady, but that's at 201. So I haven't reported a 201 trade on this show ever before. Northern trade, so Nebraska region, steady to higher on the live, which is 203 to 205. And the dress trade in the north, 322 delivered dressed. They're calling that two higher than last week. So again, holding these solid markets together big time. That wholesale market just continues to be supportive, even here in January. Surprise, surprise. Last night, the choice cutout was 333.40. That's just about $3 higher than last week. So it's supporting these stronger cash markets. The story this week's going to be a little bit on that select cutout. It's only $14 back of choice now. So that's a big jump. It's had a big gain on the choice since before Christmas. So lots of support. That's telling us there's lots of support for select product, which is good to hear. Locally, Shaun, in Alberta, the fed cattle market's strong as well. Dressed 438 to 442 delivered. That's 3 to 4 higher than last week. So when Canfax comes out with their weekly average later today, I think it's going to put it up around that 270 live. Again, new territory for fat cattle prices.
$2 US.
Yep.
For fat cattle.
Yep.
Okay, I'll ask the question because can we sustain this? Like, how do I read this? How do I? Because it's great especially if I'm holding inventory. But the question I'm sure a lot of people are asking is is this like when wheat goes to $25 and we spike and we go down, or what? When that's happened a few times in the last number of decades. How do we interpret this?
Well, I think certainly coming into 25, most analysts were expecting the market to be able to get up into the over $2 range when we got into spring, like the demand time frame. So the fact that we've got to this number this soon, I think, is the surprise. So we were expecting to get higher prices as we got into spring. The number isn't a big surprise. It's more the timing. And that still has to do a lot with demand. So I still think we've got to let things play out on this demand story. Is it at some point, you're right, Shaun, the market, the consumer will say uncle, but it just hasn't happened yet. So the supplies are going to tighten as we go through the year. Markets always try to predict things ahead of time. So that's what, our future's trying to predict it early. Those are good questions and I don't have good answers.
Well, I'm going to show on the screen here. Like this is April live cattle going back to the early 70s. And you can see very clearly here where we are historically speaking.
Yeah.
It's phenomenal. It's amazing. I'm not, and believe me, there's no complaining here. But we need the consumer domestically and internationally to continue to hold pace.
Yeah. So those are all the things we're going to watch through 25. Supplies are smaller, like we talked on the last show as we go through the year. But is this market trying to predict things earlier than we expected? That's the big question. And talking about explosive markets, Shaun, just to stay on this for a second, The feeder cattle market in Western Canada in January so far has been wild.
Wild.
So even eight and a half weight cattle are up $20 a hundred since before Christmas. So like we're talking a few weeks, right? So it's following what's going on in the fed cattle market, but that's usually not when feeder cattle explode, is in the month of January. So lots of explosive things going on. On that note, can I talk about livestock price insurance?
Yeah, go for it. Because I got a question about the feeder market overall, but you
Okay,
talk about the price
okay.
insurance.
Okay, well, I was just going to throw this out as a little bit of a reminder to listeners. So just this week, of course, the livestock price insurance premiums for feeder cattle in Alberta, next week Saskatchewan, came out, so you could start to buy insurance again. Since before Christmas, it was blackout or whatever. And then for those watching for their 2025 calf crop, the calf insurance will start coming for sale for your fall calf crop. February the 4th. So just a reminder to producers to keep an eye on things. We're not going to talk about tariffs on this show, are we, Shaun? But that's, I'm kind of calling it tariff insurance potentially.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we really don't know which path the U.S. is going to go on tariffs. Definitely, livestock industry, one of the most concerned about what this looks like. Is it on if applied? How much live animals versus boxed beef? There's a lot of different ways for it to go, and I can argue many different, all those different scenarios on why that is the one that will be selected. But I guess we'll know maybe as early as Monday. I guess when we see the live cattle explode higher, when we see the feeder cattle price in response, those two are connected, as you always say. Mm-hmm. It moves higher. So if I'm buying that inventory to place into my yard, boy, I sure want to make sure that I have some sort of hedge in place that is really trying to hold that margin for me, correct?
Yes, exactly. So, I mean, and we've talked about this lots on the show, managing that price risk, and there's an opportunity. So that is something I'm sure cattle feeders are going to be looking at.
I on Wednesday at Crop Production Show, I hosted a workshop there was about 40 producers there, and we had a great time. It was all about diversifying your operation. And one of the producers asked me during coffee, okay, like I'm growing canola and wheat, and we farm. Should I be getting back into the beef business? What would you say to that question?
Well, we know the cattle cycle is, well, I just said it, cyclical, right? And so markets move up when supplies move down and vice versa. So we know these things come to an end. There's a clear cycle. It's a long cycle, 10 to 12 years historically. So that, jumping in at the high is probably not the textbook. This is, and I suspect we are, if you again look at analysts, it suggests that we're looking at the smallest supplies over the next couple of years. So that kind of ties into the highest prices in the next couple of years. So it's a cyclical market, and I'll maybe just leave it at that.
Yeah. Okay. So we've also got some data coming out of CanFax, StatsCan. Talk about some of that. There's some.
Yeah. Well, later today, I just wanted folks to remember if they're not getting their CanFax reports to get them. Later today, CanFax will be releasing their January 1 cattle on feed report for Alberta and Saskatchewan. Now, I would have originally expected, as we saw most of last year, the cattle on feed numbers year over year to continue to drift lower, talking about these smaller supplies. But there was a report that came out from StatsCan this week that makes me scratch my head and wonder. So I'll be waiting and watching and looking for this report from CanFax later. Feeder cattle imports. This is StatsCan data. They released this week in the month of November. We're over 70,000. That's 70,000 head. That's 3.5 times bigger than last November. If you haven't been following, this kind of data. Another way, so far this year, Shaun, without November, we averaging 27,000 head a month. So then in November we bring 70, like crazy.
What's that related to though? Is that is that people like sort of what we've seen on some shipments of product where they're preloading, they're getting ahead of the Trump? Is it Trump administration related, or is it just market related? It made more sense to, or is it a supply issue from a Canadian perspective? What any thoughts there?
I really think it's a supply story still.
Yeah.
That this is still going behind the smaller Canadian cow herd that we've seen for many, many years, every year getting smaller. And at the same time, we're building, bigger feedlot capacity pens in Western Canada. So we've got a supply problem. A Western Canadian feedlot operator has to bring the supply from somewhere.
Just a question, and if you don't have it at your fingertips, just say so. But is that a Montana story, or is that pulling us like where states do we typically pull from when we are importing feeder cattle?
I don't have that at my fingertips. It'll basically talk about what border they crossed at, so it doesn't clearly tell you maybe where they originated from. I think you got to dig into CFIA data for that. So no, I would say on those kind of numbers, Shaun, they're coming from a much bigger area than just the state that we're adjacent to.
Yeah.
I just wanted to mention, we've been importing feeder cattle. We kind of started in 2017, if you recall, and the big year was 21. We did hit 1 month in 22 where we brought 50,000 in. So, in terms of what was the biggest month prior to this, it would have been back in the fall of 2022. So year to date, we're up 30% on our feeder imports. We're sitting at 340,000 head in 11 months. I don't know what December's number. I'm glad I didn't try to predict November. So we still got another month to go. And then there's two sides to it. We export feeder cattle. So in the month of November, we only exported 6,700 head. So again, on a net import, we're about 67,000 head net in November. Oh. Yeah, biggie.
Fed cattle exports.
Yeah, that's the other story that we have already been talking about in 24. It's been a big month or a big year. We're going to be, when the final data comes in, so this is up till November, we're up 27%. When December comes in, I suspect we're going to be up around 450,000 head total for the year. That's going to be the biggest year since 2010. So we have exported a lot of fat cattle this year.
Wow. We are showing a very good example of what an integrated supply chain looks like.
Exactly. Figure this trade out. Yeah. It is a really good example. You're right.
Yeah.
I did want to just touch the other piece that came from StatsCan was export, like beef data. And again, earlier on, you were talking about demand. And I keep reminding Canadians, especially, that, half of our demand is the export story. And so we did see late this year, of course, the exports dropping back. November, we were down 9%. For the whole year, we're still sitting unchanged from 2023. But I do think this kind of shows the sign of a little smaller supply. We're going to see a little smaller exports in 25 as we go forward. And all countries were down in November. We were down 7% to the U.S., down 23 to Japan, and down 26 to Mexico. So that's the story. Final story on StatsCan trade this week was, and this is December data, so we have the whole year for beef imports. It was a huge month for beef imports, up 53% from last year. The entire year, we're sitting up 13%. And of course, Australia and New Zealand is where the bulk of the products come from all year long. We've talked about it a lot. Australia up 50% and New Zealand up 48%. So makes sense. That's trim. That's manufacturing beef. That's our Canadian cow beef, if you will.
Wow. This is wild times, price-wise, policy-wise, trade-wise. This is This is fascinating time to be alive, and I am sure, because we have the inauguration on Monday, January 20th, in just a few days. We're going to have plenty to talk about in 2 weeks on the next beef market update. We'll have a little bit more clarity on potential tariffs and how they could impact the North American beef sector. Have yourself a great weekend.
Hey, thanks, Shaun. You too.
Thank you for downloading this episode of the Beef Market Update, brought to you by Brett Young. Check out their silage and grazing corn stock blends, or custom build your own mix for a happy, healthy herd. Talk to your retailer, visit brettyoung.ca today.